Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her father's corner office, watching the bustling streets of downtown Chicago 40 floors below. The people looked like ants from this height, scurrying about their daily lives, completely unaware of the young woman observing them from her ivory tower. At 22, Sarah had everything money could buy, yet she felt more trapped than the protesters she could see gathering in Grant Park in the distance. "Sarah, darling, are you even listening?" Her father's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade through silk. Richard Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Industries, sat behind his mahogany desk that cost more than most people's annual salary, his steel-gray eyes fixed on his daughter with the same intensity he reserved for hostile takeovers. "Of course, Daddy," Sarah replied, turning from the window with practiced grace. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor as she moved toward the leather chair across from his desk. Everything about her appearance was perfection itself. Her blonde hair fell in gentle waves past her shoulders. Her makeup was flawless despite the early hour, and her Chanel suit fit her petite frame like it had been sewn directly onto her body. "Then, you understand why this merger with the Blackstone Group is so important," Richard continued, shuffling through a stack of documents. "Their son, James, is a fine young man. Harvard MBA, comes from good stock. The wedding should be sometime next spring." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, though she maintained her composure with the skill of someone who had been trained since childhood to never show weakness. "Wedding?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard looked up from his papers, surprised by her tone. "Sarah, we discussed this. You knew this day would come. The Blackstone merger will secure our family's position for generations. James is a good match for you." "But I don't love him," Sarah said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I barely know him." Her father's expression hardened. "Love." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, you're not a teenager anymore. This is about legacy, about duty. Love is a luxury we can't afford." Sarah felt the familiar walls closing in around her, the same suffocating sensation she had experienced throughout her privileged, yet constrained childhood. She remembered being 8 years old, watching her mother, the only person who had ever truly understood her, waste away in a hospital bed while her father conducted business meetings in the hallway outside. Even then, duty had come before everything else. "I need some air," Sarah said, standing abruptly. "Where are you going?" Richard called after her, but she was already walking toward the door. "The gym," she replied without turning back. It was the one place her father never questioned her going. After all, maintaining her appearance was part of her duties as a Mitchell. But Sarah wasn't heading to her usual private fitness club with its yoga classes and personal trainers. Instead, she found herself driving through parts of Chicago she had never seen before, past abandoned buildings and broken streetlights, until she arrived at a nondescript warehouse in an industrial district. The sign outside read, "Murphy's Mixed Martial Arts," and the windows were too grimy to see through. She had discovered this place 3 months ago by accident, when her usual gym was closed for renovations. Something about the raw intensity she glimpsed through the front door that day had drawn her back, again and again. She told herself it was just another form of exercise, but deep down, she knew it was something more. The moment Sarah walked through the door, the contrast between this world and her own hit her like a physical force. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and determination. Men and women of all ages moved around the mats with purpose, their bodies telling stories of real struggle and genuine achievement. These people had earned every muscle, every scar, every drop of sweat that marked their skin. "Well, look who's back," called out Tommy Murphy, the gym's owner and head instructor. He was a former Marine sergeant whose body bore the marks of 2 tours in Afghanistan and countless hours of training others to fight. His prosthetic left leg never seemed to slow him down. "How's the princess today?" The nickname stung because it was true. Sarah knew she looked out of place here in her expensive workout clothes and perfectly styled hair. But she also knew that Tommy's use of the title wasn't meant to be cruel. It was his way of challenging her to prove she was more than her appearance suggested. "Ready to work," Sarah replied, pulling her hair back into a ponytail and removing her diamond earrings. "That's what I like to hear," Tommy said with a grin. Jimmy's been asking for a rematch since last week. Jimmy Rodriguez was a former gang member who had found purpose in the discipline of martial arts. He was built like a tank and had hands that could crack concrete, but Sarah had managed to surprise him during their last sparring session by using her smaller size and quicker reflexes to her advantage. As Sarah wrapped her hands and prepared for training, she felt the familiar transformation begin. Here, her trust fund and family name meant nothing. Here, she was judged solely on her effort and her willingness to endure pain. Here, she could finally breathe. The training session was brutal. Tommy pushed her harder than any personal trainer ever had, demanding that she dig deeper, fight through exhaustion, and refuse to quit even when every muscle in her body screamed for mercy. By the end of 2 hours, Sarah's expensive workout clothes were soaked with sweat. Her manicured nails were chipped and broken, and her carefully styled hair hung in sweaty strands around her face. She had never felt more beautiful. "You're getting stronger," Tommy observed as Sarah unwrapped her hands. But strength isn't just about muscles. It's about knowing who you are when everything else is stripped away. "And who am I?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about his assessment. Tommy studied her for a moment, his weathered face serious. "That's something you're going to have to figure out for yourself, princess. But I'll tell you this, there's something burning inside you that doesn't belong in that fancy tower of yours." As Sarah drove home through the darkening streets of Chicago, Tommy's words echoed in her mind. She thought about her father's expectations, about James Blackstone, and the merger that would tie her to a life she had never chosen. She thought about her mother, who had died before Sarah was old enough to ask her the questions that mattered. Most of all, she thought about the fire Tommy claimed to see in her, a flame she had never acknowledged but had always felt flickering in the depths of her being. When she arrived at the family mansion, the contrast between the two worlds she inhabited became even more stark. The house sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, its Georgian architecture and formal gardens speaking of old money and older traditions. Inside, the rooms were filled with priceless antiques and oil paintings of Mitchell ancestors, all of whom seemed to stare down at her with disapproval. Miss Sarah, Elena, the family's longtime housekeeper, appeared in the foyer as Sarah entered. "Your father is in his study. He asked to see you when you returned." Sarah nodded and made her way through the house, her footsteps muffled by Persian rugs that cost more than most people's homes. She found her father exactly where Elena had said he would be, sitting behind another massive desk in a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books that Sarah suspected he had never read. "You were gone for quite a while," Richard observed without looking up from his laptop. "The traffic was terrible," Sarah replied, hoping he wouldn't notice the small bruise forming on her chin where Jimmy had caught her with a lucky shot. "I've set up a dinner for next Friday," her father continued. "You meet Charles Blackstone and his son James. I want you to make a good impression." "Of course, Daddy," Sarah said automatically, but something in her voice must have betrayed her true feelings. Richard finally looked up from his computer, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Sarah, I know this isn't easy for you, but this is how our world works. This is how it has always worked. You have responsibilities to this family, to our legacy, to the thousands of people who depend on Mitchell Industries for their livelihoods. What about my responsibilities to myself?" The question escaped before Sarah could stop it. Her father's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the man who had once read her bedtime stories and bandaged her scraped knees. "Sometimes, darling, what we want for ourselves has to take a back seat to what's best for everyone else. That's what it means to be a Mitchell." Later that night, Sarah lay in her canopy bed, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom. The room was a monument to the girl she had once been. Pink walls decorated with ribbons from horse shows, shelves lined with trophies from tennis tournaments, and photos of herself at various charity events and social functions. But as she looked around at these remnants of her past, she felt like she was looking at artifacts from someone else's life. She thought about the Marines she had seen on the news earlier that week, returning home from deployment with stories of courage and sacrifice that made her own problems seem trivial. She thought about the women breaking barriers in fields that had once been exclusively male, proving that strength came in many forms. Most of all, She thought about the feeling of absolute clarity she experienced during training at Murphy's gym. The sense that she was finally becoming who she was meant to be. As sleep finally began to claim her, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. She didn't know exactly what form it would take or how she would find the courage to follow through, but she knew that she couldn't continue living a life that had been chosen for her by someone else. The fire Tommy had seen in her was real, and it was time to let it burn. The next morning brought the usual routine. Breakfast with her father where they discussed the weather and her upcoming charity luncheon, a morning spent answering emails and returning phone calls from friends who live lives remarkably similar to her own. But beneath the surface of normalcy, Sarah felt something shifting inside her, like tectonic plates preparing for an earthquake. She found herself researching things she had never considered before: military service requirements, physical fitness standards, stories of women who had broken through barriers in traditionally male-dominated fields. Each article she read, each video she watched, added fuel to the fire that was growing inside her. It was during lunch at the country club with her father's social circle that the final catalyst came. She was sitting at a table full of women who spent their days planning fundraisers and their evenings attending galas, listening to them discuss their children's achievements and their husband's latest business successes. Sarah, dear Mrs. Worthington, the club president's wife, leaned across the table with a conspiratorial whisper. I heard about your engagement to the Blackstone boy. How exciting. You must be simply thrilled to finally have your future settled. The words hit Sarah like a slap. Her future settled, as if her life were a business deal to be negotiated and closed, rather than a story she had the right to write herself. Actually, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet table, I haven't agreed to marry anyone. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Worthington's face flushed red, and the other women exchanged glances that spoke volumes about the gossip that would follow this lunch. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Sarah continued, standing from her chair with the grace that had been drilled into her since childhood. If you'll excuse me, I have somewhere else to be. As she walked out of the country club dining room, Sarah felt the eyes of Chicago's social elite burning into her back. She knew that by evening, her outburst will be the talk of every dinner party and charity event in the city. Her father would be furious, and James Blackstone would probably consider himself fortunate to have dodged a bullet. But for the first time in her life, Sarah Mitchell felt free. The drive to Murphy's gym seemed shorter than usual, as if her newfound determination had somehow altered the laws of physics. When she walked through the door, Tommy took one look at her face and knew that something had changed. You look different today, princess, he observed. I feel different, Sarah replied, and she meant it. Tommy, can I ask you something? Shoot. How did you know you wanted to be a Marine? Tommy's expression grew thoughtful. I guess I realized that I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. Something that mattered. Why do you ask? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that once she spoke the words aloud, there would be no taking them back. I want to join the military. The gym seemed to fall silent around them, as if even the building itself was holding its breath. Tommy studied her face for a long moment, searching for any sign that this was just another rich girl's whim. The military isn't a game, Sarah, he said finally. It's not something you do to rebel against your parents or to prove a point. It's about service, about sacrifice, about being willing to die for something greater than yourself. I know that, Sarah replied, and she was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I've been thinking about this for months. I want to serve my country. I want to do something that matters. What branch? Tommy asked, and Sarah realized that he was taking her seriously. I don't know yet, she admitted. What would you recommend? Tommy's grin was slow and dangerous. Well, princess, if you really want to prove yourself, there's only one choice that makes sense. What's that? The Navy. Specifically, you should try to become a SEAL. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She knew about the Navy SEALs, elite special operations forces who underwent some of the most brutal training in the world. She also knew that no woman had ever successfully completed their training program. Women can't be SEALs, she said. Says who? Tommy challenged. The policy changed a few years ago. Women can now try out for any military role, including special operations. The question isn't whether you can, it's whether you will. As Sarah looked around the gym at the men and women who had found their strength through struggle, she felt the final piece of her transformation click into place. She thought about her mother, who had never had the chance to follow her dreams. She thought about her father, who would probably disown her for this decision. She thought about James Blackstone and the life of comfortable captivity that awaited her if she stayed on her current path. Then she thought about the woman she could become, strong, independent, serving something greater than herself and her family's expectations. The image that formed in her mind was of someone she barely recognized, but someone she desperately wanted to meet. "When can I start?" she asked. The sound of her father's crystal whiskey glass shattering against the marble fireplace echoed through the study like a gunshot. Sarah stood perfectly still in the center of the room, her military recruitment papers clutched in her hands, watching as Richard Mitchell's face turned a shade of red she had never seen before. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I will not allow my daughter to throw her life away on some ridiculous fantasy about playing soldier." "I'm not playing anything, Daddy," Sarah replied, surprised by how calm her voice sounded despite the storm raging inside her. "I've already spoken with a recruiter. I leave for basic training in 6 weeks." The silence that followed was more frightening than his anger had been. Richard walked to his desk with measured steps, each footfall deliberate and controlled. When he turned back to face her, his expression had shifted from fury to something far more calculating. 6 weeks, he repeated slowly. "Then, I suppose we have 6 weeks to come to our senses." "There's nothing to reconsider," Sarah said firmly. "I've made my decision." "Your decision?" Richard laughed, but it was a cold sound devoid of any warmth. "Sarah, you're 22 years old. You've never wanted for anything, never faced real hardship, never even had to work for a living. What could you possibly know about making decisions?" The words stung because Sarah knew there was truth in them. She had lived a sheltered life, protected from the harsh realities that shaped most people's character. But that was exactly why she needed to do this. "Maybe that's the problem," she said quietly. "Maybe it's time I learned what real life is like." "Real life?" Richard's voice rose again. "Sarah, real life is responsibility. Real life is understanding that your actions affect more than just yourself. Do you have any idea what this will do to our family's reputation? To the business?" "I don't care about the business," Sarah shot back, and immediately regretted the words when she saw the pain flash across her father's face. "Your mother cared about this business," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She understood what it meant to our family, what it meant to the thousands of people who depend on us for their livelihoods. She would never have, don't." Sarah's voice cut through his words like a blade. "Don't you dare tell me what Mom would have wanted. She died when I was 12, and you've been speaking for her ever since." The mention of her mother seemed to drain the fight out of both of them. Richard sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "Sarah," he said finally, "I know I haven't been the father you deserved after your mother died. I know I threw myself into work instead of being there for you. But everything I've done has been to secure your future, to make sure you never have to struggle the way I did when I was building this company." "But what if I want to struggle?" Sarah asked, moving closer to his desk. "What if I need to earn something for myself, instead of just inheriting it? The military isn't about earning something, Sarah. It's about survival. It's about violence and death and things that would break someone like you." "Someone like me?" Sarah felt her anger flaring again. "What exactly is someone like me, Daddy? Weak? Spoiled? Incapable?" "Precious," Richard said simply, and the single word carried more weight than any argument he could have made. "You're precious to me, Sarah. You're all I have left of your mother, and I can't bear the thought of losing you too." For a moment, Sarah felt her resolve waver. She saw her father not as the intimidating business mogul who controlled every aspect of her life, but as a broken man who had been trying to protect the only thing he had left to love. But then she remembered the feeling of suffocation that had plagued her for years, the sense that she was slowly disappearing inside a life that had never truly been her own. "You're not losing me, Daddy," she said softly. "You're finally, go to meet the real me. The conversation that followed stretched deep into the night. Richard alternated between threats, bribes, and emotional appeals, while Sarah remained steadfast in her decision. By the time the sun began to rise over Lake Michigan, both father and daughter were exhausted, but neither had given an inch. "If you do this," Richard said as Sarah finally prepared to leave his study, "don't expect me to be here when you come crawling back." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Then, I guess we'll both have to hope I don't need to come back." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and painful goodbyes. Sarah threw herself into physical training with Tommy, pushing her body harder than ever before. She ran 10 miles every morning before dawn, spent hours at the gym working on strength and endurance, and studied military protocol and history late into the night. The hardest part wasn't the physical preparation. It was watching her carefully constructed social life crumble around her. Friends who had known her since childhood suddenly became unavailable when she called. Charity organizations quietly removed her from their boards. The country club revoked her membership, citing conduct unbecoming a lady of society. "Let them go," Tommy advised during one particularly brutal training session. "You're about to find out who your real friends are." Sarah discovered that she had fewer real friends than she had imagined. The only person from her old life who continued to support her was Elena, the family's housekeeper who had been more of a mother to her than anyone since her own mother's death. "Your mama would be proud," Elena said on Sarah's last night at home, as they sat together in the kitchen sharing coffee and homemade cookies. "She always said you had fire in you, even as a little girl." "Did she really say that?" Sarah asked, hungry for any memory of her mother that her father had never shared. "She used to watch you play in the garden, and she'd say, 'That little girl is going to change the world someday, Elena. She just doesn't know it yet.'" Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "I wish I could remember more about her." "She was like you," Elena said with a smile. "Beautiful on the outside, but strong like steel on the inside. She would have understood why you need to do this." The morning of her departure, Sarah stood in the foyer of the family mansion with a single duffel bag containing everything she was allowed to bring to basic training. The house felt different somehow, as if it already knew she didn't belong there anymore. Richard appeared at the top of the grand staircase, still wearing his bathrobe and looking older than she had ever seen him. For a moment, she thought he might come down to say goodbye, might offer some word of encouragement or support. Instead, he simply looked at her for a long moment before turning and walking back toward his bedroom. "He loves you," Elena whispered, appearing beside Sarah with tears in her eyes. "He's just afraid." "I know," Sarah replied, though the knowledge didn't make it hurt any less. The ride to O'Hare Airport gave Sarah time to reflect on everything she was leaving behind. The driver, the same man who had chauffeured her to ballet lessons and piano recitals throughout her childhood, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Miss Sarah," he said finally, as they neared the airport, "if you don't mind me saying, I think you're very brave." "Thank you, Marcus," Sarah replied, realizing that this simple acknowledgement from someone who had known her all her life meant more than all the approval she had ever received at charity galas and social events. The flight to San Diego felt like traveling to another planet. Sarah found herself surrounded by young men and women from all walks of life, all heading to begin their military careers. Some looked confident and eager. Others appeared nervous or homesick. Sarah wondered what she looked like to them. Probably like exactly what she was, a rich girl who had never faced real adversity. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Naval Recruit Training Command was a world unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. From the moment the bus pulled through the gates, she knew there would be no going back. The drill instructors who greeted them made Tommy Murphy look like a gentle kindergarten teacher, and the barracks where she would spend the next several weeks made her childhood bedroom seem like a palace. "Listen up, recruits." Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, no relation to Jimmy from the gym, stood before the assembled group of new arrivals with the bearing of someone who could kill with his bare hands and might enjoy doing so. "For the next 8 weeks, your old lives are over. You're no longer children, students, or whatever you thought you were before you stepped off that bus. You are now United States Navy recruits, and I'm going to break you down and build you back up into something worthy of wearing this uniform." Sarah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with terror as she looked around at her fellow recruits. These would be the people who would share every aspect of her life for the foreseeable future. People who knew nothing about her family's money or her privileged upbringing. For the first time in her life, she would be judged purely on her own merit. The first week of basic training was a brutal awakening. Sarah discovered that despite all her preparation with Tommy, she was nowhere near as physically ready as she had thought. The daily routine of physical training, classroom instruction, and military drills pushed her body and mind to their limits. Her hands, which had once been soft and perfectly manicured, became rough and callous from constant manual labor. Her hair, which she had always worn long and styled, was now pulled back in a regulation bun that left her feeling naked and exposed. More challenging than the physical demands were the psychological pressures. The drill instructors seemed to have an uncanny ability to identify each recruit's weaknesses and exploit them mercilessly. They quickly identified Sarah as the rich girl who didn't belong, and they made sure she knew it. "Well, Petty Officer Rodriguez said during her second week, after Sarah had struggled to complete a rope climbing exercise. Looks like Princess over here is having some trouble. Tell me, Princess, did Daddy forget to buy you some upper body strength?" The laughter from her fellow recruits cut deeper than any physical pain she had experienced. Sarah wanted to explain that she had been training, that she was trying her best, that she deserved to be here as much as anyone else. Instead, she forced herself to respond with the only phrase recruits were allowed to use when addressed by an instructor. "Yes, Petty Officer." "Yes, what, Princess?" "Yes, I will do better, Petty Officer." "Damn right you will. Drop and give me 50. As Sarah lowered herself to the ground and began doing push-ups in front of the entire company, she felt something inside her harden. This was exactly what she had come here for, the chance to prove herself through effort and determination rather than birthright and privilege. If they wanted to call her Princess, she would show them what a princess could accomplish when she set her mind to it. The nickname stuck throughout basic training, but gradually its meaning began to shift. At first, it was used mockingly, a constant reminder that Sarah didn't belong. But as the weeks progressed, and Sarah continued to push herself harder than anyone expected, the name took on a different quality. She became the princess who never quit, the princess who helped struggling teammates, the princess who somehow always found the strength to keep going when others were ready to give up. The transformation wasn't just physical, though Sarah's body did change dramatically. The soft curves of her privileged youth gave way to lean muscle earned through constant exertion. Her pale skin, once protected by expensive sunscreens and shaded terraces, became bronzed by countless hours of outdoor training. Her manicured nails were replaced by short, practical fingers that bore the scars and calluses of real work. More importantly, something fundamental shifted in how Sarah saw herself and her place in the world. The girl who had once been afraid to speak up at dinner parties now had no problem yelling cadence during training runs. The young woman who had never been allowed to fail at anything now learned to embrace failure as a teacher and motivation to improve. The academic portion of basic training proved to be one area where Sarah's privileged education served her well. While other recruits struggled with navigation, military history, and technical subjects, Sarah found herself naturally excelling. She began tutoring her fellow recruits in the evenings, sharing her knowledge without condescension or superiority. It was during one of these tutoring sessions that she met Marcus Thompson, a young man from rural Mississippi who had joined the Navy to escape a cycle of poverty that had trapped his family for generations. Marcus was physically gifted, but struggled with the classroom work that came easily to Sarah. "I don't get how you do it, Princess," Marcus said one evening as Sarah helped him with a navigation problem. "You make this stuff look so easy." "I had good teachers," Sarah replied simply, "and I'm happy to share what I know." "Why?" Marcus asked. "I mean, we're all competing against each other here. Helping me just makes it harder for you to stand out." Sarah considered the question carefully. In her old life, everything had been about competition. Who had the newest designer clothes, who was invited to the most exclusive events, who married the most successful man. Here, she was discovering the satisfaction that came from lifting others up instead of climbing over them. Maybe that's not the kind of standing out that matters, she said. As basic training entered its final weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward rather than backward for the first time in her life. She had proven to herself and others that she could succeed in this environment, but she knew this was only the beginning. Her real goal, becoming a Navy SEAL, would require her to push even further beyond her comfort zone. The graduation ceremony was a powerful moment that would stay with Sarah for the rest of her life. As she stood in formation wearing her Navy dress uniform, she felt a pride that was entirely different from anything she had experienced before. This wasn't pride in something she had inherited or been given. It was pride in something she had earned through sweat, sacrifice, and determination. Looking out at the audience, Sarah was surprised to see a familiar face in the crowd. Elena had flown from Chicago to attend her graduation, and her presence meant more to Sarah than any expensive gift her father might have sent. After the ceremony, they embraced with tears in both their eyes. "Your mama would be so proud," Elena whispered. "I wish Daddy could see that too," Sarah replied. "Give him time, Mija. Sometimes love looks like anger when people are afraid." That night, alone in her temporary quarters, Sarah made the phone call she had been avoiding for 8 weeks. Her father's voice sounded tired when he answered. "Hello, Daddy," she said simply. There was a long pause before Richard spoke. "I saw the graduation ceremony online," he said quietly. "You look different." "I am different," Sarah replied. "I'm better." Another pause. "What happens next?" "I'm going to try to become a Navy SEAL." She heard her father's sharp intake of breath. "Sarah, no one has ever. I mean, women haven't, I know," Sarah interrupted. "That's exactly why I have to try." When her father spoke again, his voice was softer than she had heard it in years. "Your mother would have said the same thing. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't approval, but it was acknowledgement. For now, that was enough." As Sarah prepared for the next phase of her journey, she reflected on how much had changed in just 8 weeks. The sheltered socialite who had entered basic training no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, and driven by a purpose that came from within rather than from external expectations. But even as she celebrated this transformation, Sarah knew that the real test was still ahead of her. Basic training had been difficult, but it was designed for ordinary recruits to succeed. Navy SEAL training was designed to break extraordinary candidates and rebuild only the strongest survivors. The girl who had once been afraid to disappoint her father was about to attempt something that had never been done successfully by any woman in history. She was about to find out just how much strength she had discovered in the ashes of her former life. The princess was ready for war. The Pacific Ocean was 38 degrees Fahrenheit when Sarah Mitchell plunged into the surf for the first time during basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. The shock of the cold water hit her system like electricity, driving the breath from her lungs and causing every muscle in her body to seize. Around her, grown men who had survived basic training were gasping and struggling to maintain composure. But Sarah forced herself to focus on the rhythm of her breathing and the burn in her muscles that told her she was still alive. "Move it, move it, move it!" Chief Petty Officer Williams shouted from the beach. The only easy day was yesterday. Sarah had heard that motto countless times since arriving at Naval Special Warfare Command 3 months ago, but it had never felt more true than in this moment. Every day of BUD/S training had been designed to push candidates beyond their perceived limits, and today was no exception. She was one of only 3 women in a class that had started with 147 candidates. The other 2 had already dropped out, one during the first week after a stress fracture in her leg, and another during the infamous grinder PT sessions that had broken dozens of male candidates as well. Now Sarah stood alone as the only woman still attempting to earn the Navy SEAL Trident, a fact that brought both unwanted attention and additional pressure. The instructors had made it clear from day one that they would show no favoritism or special consideration because of her gender. If anything, they seemed to push her harder, as if they were determined to prove that the barriers to women in special operations existed for good reason. "Princess," Chief Williams called out as the candidates struggled through the surf zone. "You're lagging behind. Pick up the pace or ring that bell." The bell. Every candidate knew about the brass bell that sat prominently displayed near the training compound entrance. 3 rings of that bell, and any candidate could walk away from the torture and return to normal Navy duties. Over the past 3 months, Sarah had watched dozens of strong, determined men ring that bell and disappear forever. The sound haunted her dreams and called to her during the darkest moments of training. But not today. Today, Sarah dug deeper and found strength she didn't know she possessed. She pushed through the freezing water, her movements becoming more efficient as her body adapted to the conditions. By the time she reached the designated point offshore, she was keeping pace with the stronger swimmers in her class. The real test, however, was still ahead of her. Hell Week loomed on the horizon. 5.5 days of continuous training with a total of only 4 hours of sleep. It was the crucible that separated those who merely wanted to be SEALs from those who were willing to sacrifice everything for the privilege. Sarah's preparation for Hell Week had begun months earlier, not just physically, but mentally. She had studied every account she could find of previous Hell Weeks, learning from the experiences of those who had survived and those who had quit. She understood that the physical challenges, though brutal, were only part of the equation. The real battle would be fought in her mind. The week leading up to Hell Week was filled with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Candidates who had become friends and training partners over months of shared suffering suddenly became rivals, each knowing that statistically only a small percentage would make it through the coming ordeal. The instructors seemed to take particular pleasure in ramping up the psychological pressure. You think you know what tired feels like? Instructor Chief Martinez asked the assembled class on the Friday before Hell Week began. You think you understand what it means to push through pain? By Thursday morning, half of you will be gone. By Sunday, only the truly committed will remain. That weekend, Sarah found herself alone in her barracks room, mentally preparing for what she knew would be the most challenging experience of her life. She thought about her father, who still struggled to understand her decision, but had begun sending brief, encouraging texts. She thought about Tommy Murphy, who had warned her that she would discover parts of herself she never knew existed. Most of all, she thought about her mother and the strength she might have inherited from a woman she barely remembered. Hell Week began at sunset on a Sunday evening with the sound of gunfire and explosions. The instructors stormed the barracks wearing full combat gear, shouting orders and creating chaos designed to disorient and overwhelm the candidates. Sarah's heart raced as she scrambled to dress and grab her gear, but beneath the adrenaline, she felt a strange sense of calm. This was what she had been training for, what she had sacrificed her old life to attempt. The first night set the tone for everything that would follow. Log PT, physical training while carrying enormous telephone poles as a team, began in the darkness and continued through the dawn. Sarah found herself struggling not just with the weight of the logs, but with the dynamics of working with male teammates who weren't always willing to trust her with crucial tasks. "I can handle my share," she insisted when her boat crew tried to position her on the end where she would bear less weight. "This isn't about proving a point, princess," said David Chun, the boat crew leader and a former college football player. "This is about the team succeeding." "The team succeeds when everyone carries their full weight," Sarah shot back. "I'm not asking for special treatment, and I won't accept it." The exchange was brief, but significant. From that moment forward, her boat crew treated her as an equal partner rather than a liability to be managed. It was a small victory, but in the context of Hell Week, small victories were what kept candidates moving forward. The sleep deprivation began to take its toll by Tuesday. Sarah found herself hallucinating during the long night training exercises, seeing shapes and figures that weren't there. During one particularly grueling evolution, she was convinced that her mother was standing on the beach watching her, offering silent encouragement. The rational part of her mind knew it was exhaustion playing tricks, but the emotional comfort was real enough. By Wednesday, the class had shrunk from 87 candidates to 31. Sarah watched strong, capable men ring the bell and walk away, their dreams of becoming SEALs crushed by the relentless pressure. Each departure was a reminder that she too was only one moment of weakness away from giving up. It was during Wednesday night's boat races that Sarah faced her closest call with the bell. Her boat crew was struggling in last place, and the instructors were making their displeasure known with additional punishment exercises. Sarah's body was running on fumes. Her hands were raw and bleeding from rope burns, and every muscle fiber screamed in protest. "This is stupid," muttered Jake Harrison, one of her teammates. "We're killing ourselves for nothing." The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow because part of her agreed. The rational voice in her head pointed out that she had already proven herself by making it this far. She could ring the bell with honor intact, knowing that she had pushed further than any woman before her. She could return to normal Navy duties, serve her country in a meaningful way, and still have accomplished something extraordinary. But then she remembered the feeling of suffocation she had experienced in her father's mansion, the sense that she was disappearing inside someone else's expectations for her life. She thought about all the women who would come after her, who might be inspired to attempt this challenge because she had shown it was possible. She thought about the fire that Tommy Murphy had seen in her, the strength that Elena insisted she had inherited from her mother. "We're not doing this for nothing," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly despite her exhaustion. "We're doing this because no one else can do it for us." Something in her tone seemed to reach her teammates. David Shun nodded grimly and called for the crew to pick up the pace. Jake Harrison stopped complaining and threw himself back into the race with renewed determination. They didn't win that evolution, but they didn't finish last either. Thursday brought the infamous Around the World exercise, a continuous series of physical challenges that took the surviving candidates around the entire Naval Special Warfare compound. Sarah's world had narrowed to the immediate task in front of her. The next step, the next breath, the next moment of forward progress. The outside world ceased to exist, and even her own identity seemed to fade away, leaving only the pure will to continue. It was during this exercise that something fundamental shifted inside Sarah. The pain didn't disappear, but it stopped being her enemy. The exhaustion remained, but it no longer controlled her. She found herself moving through the challenges with a mechanical efficiency that surprised even her instructors. "Mitchell," Chief Williams called out as she completed a particularly difficult obstacle course. "What's your status?" "Ready for the next evolution, Chief," Sarah replied automatically, though she wasn't entirely sure how she was still standing. "Outstanding," Williams said, and Sarah caught something that might have been approval in his voice. Friday brought the end of Hell Week, but also its final test. The candidates who remained, now down to just 18, were required to complete a final ocean swim while carrying full equipment. Sarah's body was beyond exhaustion, operating on pure determination and muscle memory developed over months of training. As she entered the frigid Pacific waters for what she hoped would be the last time during Hell Week, Sarah felt an unexpected moment of clarity. The girl who had entered these waters 5 days ago was gone forever, replaced by someone she was still getting to know. This new version of herself was harder, stronger, and possessed of a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with family wealth or social status. The swim seemed to last forever, but eventually Sarah found herself crawling through the surf onto the beach where the instructors waited. She had made it. She had survived Hell Week. The brown t-shirt ceremony that marked the completion of Hell Week was a moment of pure emotion for Sarah. As an instructor placed the coveted brown t-shirt over her head, a symbol that she was no longer just a trainee, but a legitimate candidate for the teams, she felt tears mixing with the salt water on her face. "Congratulations, Mitchell," Chief Williams said, shaking her hand with genuine respect. "You've earned this." Looking around at the 17 other survivors, Sarah realized that these men were no longer just her classmates. They were her brothers. They had shared something that few people in the world would ever experience, and that bond would connect them forever regardless of what happened next in their training. But Hell Week was only one milestone in the long journey toward earning the Trident. The months that followed brought new challenges that tested different aspects of Sarah's capabilities. Combat diving taught her to work effectively in the underwater environment that was central to SEAL operations. Land warfare training pushed her tactical skills and weapons proficiency. Small unit tactics required her to think strategically while operating under extreme stress. Each phase brought new opportunities for failure and new tests of Sarah's resolve. During combat diving, she struggled with equipment malfunctions that nearly caused her to fail the underwater navigation course. During land warfare, her smaller size sometimes put her at a disadvantage during long movements with heavy equipment. But for every weakness she discovered, Sarah found ways to compensate through superior preparation, tactical thinking, or sheer determination. The instructors continued to push her harder than her male counterparts, seemingly looking for any excuse to remove her from the program. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah was required to carry a wounded teammate to safety while under simulated enemy fire. The wounded teammate was a 250-pound former Marine who outweighed her by more than 100 pounds. "This is impossible," the Marine whispered as Sarah struggled to lift him. "You can't do this." "Shut up and let me work," Sarah replied, adjusting her grip and finding a way to get him into a fireman's carry position. The evacuation took longer than it would have with a larger candidate, but Sarah completed it successfully, proving that technique and determination could overcome physical disadvantages. As the training progressed, Sarah began to earn the respect of her instructors and classmates, not despite her gender, but because of her performance. She became known for her attention to detail, her ability to remain calm under pressure, and her willingness to help struggling teammates. The nickname Princess evolved once again, this time carrying undertones of respect and affection rather than mockery. The final phase of BUD/S training was SQT, SEAL qualification training, which would determine whether she would actually earn the right to join a SEAL team. This phase focused on advanced tactics, specialized skills, and real-world mission scenarios. It was here that Sarah truly began to understand what it meant to be a Navy SEAL beyond just surviving the selection process. During one particularly complex night exercise, Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating a simulated enemy compound and extracting a high-value target. The mission required precise coordination, advanced technical skills, and the ability to adapt when things went wrong, which they inevitably did. When the team's primary extraction route was compromised by enemy forces, Sarah quickly identified an alternative approach that used her smaller size to advantage. She was able to access the compound through a ventilation system that would have been impossible for larger team members to navigate. "Nice work, Princess," her team leader said after the successful completion of the exercise. That's the kind of thinking that saves lives in the real world. As SQT neared its conclusion, Sarah found herself facing a different kind of pressure. Media attention had begun to focus on her progress through the training, with headlines speculating about whether she would become the first woman to earn the SEAL Trident. The attention was unwelcome, but Sarah understood that her success or failure would have implications far beyond her own career. The night before graduation, Sarah sat alone on the beach where she had spent so many hours in training. The physical pain of the past year had long since faded, replaced by a deep sense of accomplishment and belonging. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the suffocating luxury of her father's mansion to this moment of triumph. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She was surprised to see that it was from her father, watching the ceremony online tomorrow. "Proud of you. Love, Dad." It was the first time Richard Mitchell had said he was proud of her accomplishment rather than disappointed by her choices. Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "Thank you for letting me find my own way." The graduation ceremony was held on a perfect California morning, with the Pacific Ocean providing a backdrop that seemed appropriate for the culmination of Sarah's transformation. As she stood in formation with her remaining classmates, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since she first entered these waters as a terrified recruit. When her name was called, and she stepped forward to receive her SEAL Trident, Sarah felt a moment of perfect clarity. The pin being placed on her uniform represented more than just the completion of training. It was the symbol of everything she had discovered about herself during the journey. "Congratulations, Petty Officer Mitchell," the commanding officer said as he shook her hand. "Welcome to the teams." As the ceremony concluded and Sarah's new teammates gathered around to welcome her, she thought about the Marines she would soon encounter in joint training exercises. She remembered the mocking voices that had once called her princess as an insult, and she smiled at the irony. They had been right about one thing. She was indeed a princess. But now she was a princess who had earned her crown through blood, sweat, and the kind of determination that had nothing to do with birthright and everything to do with choice. She was a princess who could navigate underwater in complete darkness, who could carry a wounded teammate to safety, who could infiltrate enemy positions and complete missions that others deemed impossible. Most importantly, she was a princess who had finally found her kingdom, not in her father's mansion or society's expectations, but in the brotherhood of elite warriors who had accepted her as an equal. The girl who had once feared disappointing others had become a woman who would never again be afraid to disappoint anyone except herself. The real test, however, was still ahead. Earning the trident was just the beginning. Now Sarah would have to prove herself in the operational teams, where the training would give way to real missions with real consequences. She would have to show that she could not only survive the selection process, but excel in the demanding world of special operations. But as she looked out at the Pacific Ocean that had been both her adversary and her teacher, Sarah Mitchell knew she was ready for whatever came next. The princess had become a warrior, and the war was just beginning. Hashtag first deployment, the helicopter lifted off from the USS Bataan just after midnight, carrying Sarah Mitchell and her SEAL team toward their first real combat mission together. Through the aircraft's small windows, she could see the dark waters of the Mediterranean Sea stretching endlessly below, lit only by stars, and the faint glow of the ship's lights receding in the distance. In 6 hours, those same waters would either carry them back as successful operators or bear witness to the consequences of failure. Sarah checked her equipment for the third time, running through the mental checklist that had become second nature during her 18 months with SEAL Team 3. Her 416 Hong Kong dollars rifle was clean and properly zeroed. Her communications gear was functioning perfectly, and her medical kit contained everything necessary to treat combat injuries in the field. But no amount of equipment checks could quiet the nervous energy that coursed through her system as they approached their objective. The mission itself was straightforward on paper. Infiltrate a terrorist compound on the Syrian coast, capture or eliminate a high-value target who had been coordinating attacks against American interests in the region, and extract with minimal civilian casualties. In reality, Sarah knew that no mission was ever as simple as it appeared in the briefing room. 5 minutes out, the crew chief announced over the intercom. Chief Petty Officer Jake Martinez, the team leader Sarah had come to respect and trust completely over the past year and a half, signaled for final equipment checks. Sarah watched as her 5 teammates went through their pre-mission rituals with the calm efficiency of professionals who had done this dozens of times before. Despite her extensive training, this would be her first time leading an element in actual combat, and the weight of responsibility felt heavier than any gear she had ever carried. "Mitchell," Martinez said quietly, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines. "You ready for this?" "Roger, Chief," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Ready to bring everyone home." Martinez nodded approvingly. In the 18 months since Sarah had joined the team, she had proven herself repeatedly in training exercises and smaller operations, but tonight would mark her transition from promising rookie to proven operator. The rest of the team had gradually accepted her not as a woman playing at being a SEAL, but as a teammate they could trust with their lives. That acceptance hadn't come easily or quickly. Her first months with Team 3 had been marked by subtle tests and challenges as her new teammates evaluated whether the woman who had made headlines for completing Beauty/S could actually perform in the field. Some of the testing had been professional, deliberately difficult training scenarios designed to reveal any weaknesses in her skills or decision-making. Other challenges had been more personal, as strong-willed alpha males worked out the dynamics of operating with someone who didn't fit their traditional understanding of what a SEAL looked like. The breakthrough had come during a particularly demanding training exercise in the mountains of Nevada. Sarah's element had been tasked with reaching a specific objective while being hunted by a larger opposing force. When one of her teammates, Petty Officer Second Class Ryan Walsh, suffered a severe ankle injury during the approach, the mission parameters changed dramatically. "Leave me," Walsh had insisted, recognizing that his injury would slow down the entire element and likely result in mission failure. "Complete the objective." "Not happening," Sarah had replied firmly, already working to stabilize his ankle and figure out an alternative approach. What followed was a grueling 20-hour evolution in which Sarah led the team through terrain that maximized her smaller size and superior endurance while minimizing Walsh's mobility limitations. She successfully completed the primary objective while ensuring that no teammate was left behind, demonstrating the kind of innovative tactical thinking and unwavering loyalty that defined the best SEAL operators. "You carried me when you didn't have to," Walsh had told her after the exercise. "That makes you family." The sentiment had been echoed by the rest of the team, and Sarah's status shifted permanently from outsider trying to prove herself to trusted teammate who had already proven herself. Chief Martinez began giving her increasingly complex responsibilities, preparing her for exactly the kind of leadership role she would be assuming tonight. 2 minutes, the crew chief announced. Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission calm descend over her as the helicopter began its final approach to the insertion point. All the nervousness and anticipation faded away, replaced by the focused clarity that came from months of preparation and training. This was what she had sacrificed her old life to achieve, the opportunity to serve her country in the most demanding and consequential way possible. The compound they were targeting sat on a cliff overlooking the Syrian coast, its position chosen specifically to provide early warning of approaching threats from land or sea. Intelligence suggested that between 12 and 18 enemy fighters were present, led by Hassan al-Rashid, a former Syrian military officer who had become a key coordinator for terrorist operations throughout the region. Al-Rashid's capture would likely prevent several planned attacks against American and Allied forces. Sarah's element would approach from the sea using Zodiac boats, scaling the cliff face under cover of darkness to establish a perimeter around the compound. Martinez would lead the primary assault team through the front entrance, while Sarah's team secured the rear of the building and prevented any attempts to escape or destroy evidence. The helicopter flared and settled into a hover just above the dark water, its rotors creating a violent downwash that turned the sea surface into a chaos of spray and waves. One by one, the team members fast roped down to their waiting Zodiac boats, their movements precise and coordinated despite the challenging conditions. Sarah was the last to descend, and as her boots touched the rubber deck of the Zodiac, she felt the weight of command settle onto her shoulders. The 3 SEALs under her leadership, Walsh, Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Thompson from her basic training days, and Petty Officer Third Class David Kim, looked to her for guidance as they prepared to begin their approach to the target. "Radio check," Sarah whispered into her throat microphone as the Zodiacs began their run towards shore. "Lima 2-1, good copy," came Thompson's voice. "Lima 2-2, good copy," reported Kim. "Lima 2-3, good copy," confirmed Walsh. "Lima 2, all elements report ready," Sarah transmitted to Chief Martinez. "Roger, Lima 2. Execute approach as briefed. Stay safe out there." The Zodiac boats moved through the water with their engines muffled, approaching the rocky coastline with the stealth that was central to SEAL operations. Sarah used her night vision goggles to scan the cliff face above them, looking for any signs of sentries or surveillance equipment that might compromise their insertion. The climb up the cliff face was challenging, but not beyond the capabilities of operators who had trained extensively in mountainous terrain. Sarah led the way, finding handholds and footholds in the rocky surface while maintaining communication with her team members below. The weight of her equipment made every movement deliberate and careful, but the months of physical conditioning had prepared her for exactly this type of demanding operation. As they neared the top of the cliff, Sarah heard the first sounds of activity from the compound above. Voices speaking in Arabic, the crackle of a radio, the distant sound of a generator providing power to the building. She held up a closed fist, signaling her team to halt while she assessed the situation. Peering over the edge of the cliff, Sarah could see the compound's rear entrance approximately 50 meters away. Two guards were visible, one smoking a cigarette near the door while the other walked a patrol route around the building's perimeter. The layout matched the intelligence briefings perfectly, but Sarah knew that real operations rarely proceeded exactly as planned. Lima 1, this is Lima 2, Sarah whispered into her radio. In position at the rear entrance. Two guards visible. No additional security observed. Roger, Lima 2. Stand by for execute command. Sarah checked her watch and confirmed that they were exactly on schedule. In 3 minutes, Chief Martinez would begin his assault on the front entrance, and Sarah's team would need to be ready to prevent any escape attempts while securing their assigned portion of the building. The next few minutes stretched like hours as Sarah's team waited in position. She could hear her own heartbeat despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, could feel the familiar weight of her rifle in her hands, could sense the tension and readiness of the three SEALs positioned behind her. This was the moment that would define her as an operator, the transition from training to reality, from potential to performance. All elements, this is Lima 1. Execute, execute, execute. The night exploded into controlled violence as both teams moved simultaneously toward their objectives. Sarah heard the sound of explosive charges detonating at the front entrance as she and her team moved toward the rear of the compound. The element of surprise was critical. They needed to secure their objectives before the enemy could organize an effective response. Lima 2-3, take the guard on the left, Sarah commanded as they approached the building. Lima 2-2, you have the patrol. Lima 2-1, with me on the door. The engagement was brief, but intense. Walsh and Kim eliminated their targets with suppressed weapons while Sarah and Thompson breached the rear entrance and began clearing the back portion of the building. The rooms they encountered were mostly empty storage areas and sleeping quarters, but each had to be systematically cleared to ensure no threats remained hidden. It was in the third room they entered that Sarah encountered her first real test of combat leadership. As Thompson moved to clear a closet, a hidden enemy fighter emerged from behind a curtain with an AK-47 rifle raised. Sarah reacted instinctively, putting 3 rounds center mass into the threat before he could fire, but not before recognizing that the fighter appeared to be no more than 16 years old. Target down, Sarah reported automatically, but the sight of the young face would stay with her long after the mission was complete. This was the reality of special operations. Sometimes the enemy wore a familiar face, sometimes difficult choices had to be made in split-second time frames, and sometimes the cost of protecting American lives meant taking lives that might have been saved under different circumstances. Lima 2, this is Lima 1. Package secured. Consolidate on my position for extraction. Sarah felt a surge of relief as Chief Martinez's voice confirmed the successful capture of their primary target. The mission's main objective had been accomplished, and now they needed to withdraw before enemy reinforcements could arrive or local authorities could complicate their extraction. Roger, Lima 1. Lima 2 moving to consolidate. As Sarah led her team toward the front of the compound, she conducted a quick assessment of their status. No friendly casualties, all assigned objectives secured, and enemy resistance neutralized with minimal collateral damage. By any measure, the operation had been a success. They found Chief Martinez and his team securing Hassan al-Rashid, who had been captured alive along with several computers and hard drives containing intelligence about planned operations. The terrorist leader was conscious but defiant, glaring at his captors with undisguised hatred. Outstanding work, Mitchell, Martinez said as Sarah's team joined the consolidation. Clean execution. Thank you, Chief. Ready for extraction. The helicopter extraction went smoothly, with both teams and their prisoner aboard the aircraft within minutes of reaching the pickup zone. As the helicopter lifted off and began its return flight to the USS Bataan, Sarah allowed herself to feel the satisfaction that came with successful completion of a dangerous mission. But the real impact of the night's events wouldn't become clear until several days later, when intelligence analysis of the capture materials revealed the scope of the planned attacks that had been prevented. Al-Rashid had been coordinating suicide bombings against 3 different American bases, operations that would have killed dozens of service members and potentially hundreds of civilians. Your first combat mission probably saved more American lives than some operators save in entire careers, Chief Martinez told Sarah during the debrief. That's something to be proud of. The months that followed brought additional operations, each one building Sarah's experience and confidence as an operator. She led successful missions against drug smugglers in Central America, conducted reconnaissance operations in Eastern Europe, and participated in training exercises with allied special operations forces around the world. With each mission, Sarah's reputation within the special operations community grew. She became known for her meticulous planning, her ability to adapt to changing circumstances, and her unwavering commitment to bringing all team members home safely. The media attention that had once focused on her gender began to shift toward her professional accomplishments and operational successes. It was during this period that Sarah first encountered the Marines, who would later become the focus of a training exercise that would define her legacy within the special operations community. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez and his team were participating in a joint exercise designed to test interoperability between different branches of the military special operations forces. The Marines were professional and competent, but Sarah sensed an underlying skepticism about her abilities that went beyond the usual inter-service rivalry. During the mission briefing, she noticed the subtle eye rolls when she presented her portion of the operational plan, heard the whispered comments about political correctness and social experiments that her teammates pretended not to hear. "Something wrong with the plan, Gunny?" Sarah asked directly, addressing Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez. "No, ma'am," Rodriguez replied with exaggerated formality. "I'm sure it's a fine plan for someone with your experience level." The comment was carefully worded to avoid any overt insubordination, while making it clear that he questioned her qualifications to be leading elite operators in combat. Sarah recognized the challenge for what it was, and knew that her response would set the tone for all future interactions with these Marines. "Gunny," she said calmly, "I understand your concerns. Why don't we settle this the old-fashioned way? What did you have in mind, ma'am? Training exercise. Your team against mine. Full contact, scenario-based. Winner gets bragging rights, loser buys the beer." The challenge hung in the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. Sarah knew she was risking not just her own reputation, but potentially setting back the cause of women in special operations if her team lost decisively. But she also knew that respect in the special operations community was earned through demonstrated competence under pressure, not through political correctness or social engineering. "You're on," Rodriguez said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. As word of the challenge spread throughout the base, Sarah realized that she had committed herself and her team to something much larger than a simple training exercise. The outcome would be seen as a referendum on the wisdom of allowing women into the most elite units of the American military. Win, and she would prove that gender was irrelevant when it came to operational effectiveness. Lose, and she would confirm the suspicions of everyone who believed that political correctness was undermining military readiness. The pressure was enormous, but Sarah had been preparing for this moment since the day she first walked into Tommy Murphy's gym in Chicago. Every hour of training, every difficult decision, every sacrifice she had made had been leading to this confrontation. The princess was about to find out if she had truly become the warrior she believed herself to be. The stage was set for a battle that would echo throughout the military for years to come, and Sarah Mitchell stood at the center of it all, carrying the hopes and doubts of everyone who had ever wondered whether women belonged in the most demanding roles the military had to offer. She was ready to provide an answer that no one would ever question again. The final proving the training compound at Marine Corps Base Quantico buzzed with an energy that felt different from any exercise Sarah Mitchell had participated in before. Word of the challenge between her SEAL team and Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez's Marine Special Operations team had spread throughout the special operations community like wildfire. Officers and enlisted personnel from multiple branches had found reasons to be present for what was being called the most significant inter-service competition in years. Sarah stood in the equipment shed with her 4 teammates, conducting final checks on their gear, while trying to ignore the weight of expectation that seemed to press down from all sides. Chief Martinez had insisted on participating personally, despite the fact that as a senior enlisted leader, he could have delegated the responsibility to someone else. Walsh, Thompson, and Kim completed the team, each of them understanding that they weren't just representing SEAL Team 3, but the entire philosophy of merit-based selection regardless of gender. "Feels like half the Pentagon is here," Walsh observed, adjusting the straps on his tactical vest. "Good," Sarah replied, checking the batteries in her communications equipment. "Let them watch. Let them see what we can do when we're not worried about politics or opinions." The exercise scenario was complex and realistic, designed to test every aspect of special operations capabilities. Both teams would be dropped at separate locations within a 50-square-kilometer training area that included forests, urban environments, and water obstacles. Their mission was to locate and secure a high-value target. Actually, a civilian contractor wearing sensors that would detect if he had been properly captured, while avoiding detection by opposing forces and dealing with various complications that would be introduced throughout the exercise. The target would be moved periodically based on intelligence reports that both teams would have to intercept and decode. Success would be measured not just on who reached the target first, but on tactical proficiency, adaptability to changing circumstances, and adherence to rules of engagement that prohibited unnecessary casualties among role-playing civilians. Remember, Chief Martinez addressed the team as they prepared to board their insertion helicopter. "This isn't about proving that women can do the job. Mitchell's already proven that. This is about proving that the best team wins, regardless of what anyone thinks about gender politics." Sarah appreciated his words, but she also knew that the wider implications of this exercise couldn't be ignored. Success would validate the military's decision to open all combat roles to women, while failure would provide ammunition to critics who believe that standards have been lowered for the sake of social engineering. As the helicopter lifted off from Quantico, Sarah looked out at the sprawling training area below and felt the familiar pre-mission calm settling over her. She had learned to trust this feeling during her months of operational deployments, and she welcomed it now as a sign that her mind and body were prepared for the challenges ahead. The insertion went smoothly, with her team fast roping into a forested area approximately 15 kilometers from the target's last known location. As soon as their boots hit the ground, Sarah began implementing the tactical plan she had developed during the mission briefing, a plan that played to her team's strengths while accounting for the advantages their Marine opponents would likely possess. "Lima elements, radio check," Sarah whispered in her throat microphone as the team formed up and began moving toward their first objective. "Lima 2, good copy. Lima 3, good copy. Lima 4, good copy. Lima 5, good copy." The acknowledgments from her teammates carried the same professional calm she had heard on actual combat missions, and Sarah felt her confidence growing as they settled into the rhythm of movement and communication that had been refined through countless hours of training and real-world operations. The first intelligence intercept came 30 minutes into the exercise, delivered through encrypted radio transmission that both teams would have received simultaneously. The target had been moved from the original location to a compound in the urban training area, but the transmission also indicated that opposing forces had been alerted to the presence of both teams and were actively hunting them. "Change of plans," Sarah announced as her team reached their first rally point. "Target's been moved to the urban area, and we've got hunters on our trail. Martinez, any thoughts on approach?" "Your call, Mitchell, but I'd recommend avoiding the obvious routes. Rodriguez's team will be thinking like Marines, direct assault, overwhelming firepower. We need to think like SEALs." Sarah nodded, already formulating a plan that would use their maritime training and unconventional warfare expertise to approach the problem from an angle the Marines wouldn't expect. The urban training area was bisected by a river that most teams treated as an obstacle to be avoided. Sarah intended to treat it as a highway. "We're going swimming," she announced, much to the surprise of her teammates. "Mom?" Thompson questioned. "The river runs right behind a target compound. Every other team that's used this training area has approached overland. Rodriguez's team will be expecting us to do the same, so they'll position their surveillance accordingly. But if we approach from the water, we bypass their entire defensive plan," Walsh finished, understanding immediately. "Exactly. and water work is something we do better than anyone. The underwater approach took 2 hours of careful movement through the river system, with Sarah's team using rebreathers to avoid detection while navigating by compass and pace count. It was demanding work that required the kind of specialized skills that set SEALs apart from other special operations forces, and Sarah felt her team's confidence growing as they executed techniques that played directly to their training and experience. They emerged from the river just as the sun was setting,